The auction block stood like a judgment seat in the center of Redemption Creek's dusty square, and on it stood a woman whose dignity burned brighter than the Arizona sun. Ellie Freeman held her chin high despite the iron shackles that bound her wrists, despite the jeers from the crowd of men who circled like vultures. The auctioneer's voice cut through the desert heat. Bidding started low. The men treated her like livestock, examining her hands, commenting on her posture. She spoke above their voices, clear and unwavering. "I am a free woman. I have papers." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone spat in the dirt near her feet. The bids climbed higher. $50, $75, $100. In the shadow of the general store, Arthur Morgan watched with hands clenched at his sides. The weathered rancher had seen enough cruelty in his 32 years to last several lifetimes. His jaw tightened as the bidding reached $200. The woman's eyes swept the crowd, searching for something. Mercy, perhaps, or simple human decency. Her gaze found Arthur's face in the shadows. For a moment, time seemed to pause between them. Arthur stepped forward into the blazing sunlight. $500. The crowd fell silent. Even the auctioneer paused, his hammer frozen mid-swing. Sheriff Dutch van der Linde, a man whose charm masked a heart black as coal, grinned from his position near the courthouse steps. "Well now," Dutch called out, his voice carrying across the square. "That's what I call decisive bidding." The hammer fell. The sound echoed off the wooden buildings like a gunshot. Arthur felt every eye in the crowd turn toward him, measuring, judging. He ignored them all. His focus remained on the woman whose life had just been purchased for the price of good cattle. Dutch approached with the swagger of a man who owned the town. His badge caught the sunlight, though everyone knew his law came from the barrel of a gun rather than any book of justice. "Congratulations, Arthur. Fine purchase." Dutch's smile never reached his eyes. "Just remember, she's your responsibility. Now, any trouble she causes reflects on you." Arthur nodded once. He approached the auction block where Ellie still stood, her shoulders straight despite everything that had just transpired. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment concluded. Business would resume as normal. The blacksmith who doubled as the town's unofficial jailer unlocked Ellie's shackles with a key that had seen too much use. Her wrists bore the marks of iron, but her hands didn't shake as she rubbed the circulation back into them. Arthur gestured toward his horse, a sturdy bay mare tied to the hitching post. Ellie studied his face, searching for clues about her fate. His features were weathered by sun and wind, marked by years of hard living, but his eyes held something she hadn't expected. "What do you want with me?" she asked. Arthur's voice was quiet, almost lost in the desert wind. "To set things right." The ride to Arthur's ranch passed in silence. Ellie sat behind him on the horse, her hands barely touching his shoulders for balance. The landscape rolled past in waves of red earth and stubborn grass. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants. Arthur's ranch appeared as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The buildings were simple but well maintained. A house with a wide porch. A barn that had seen better years but still stood solid. Corrals where cattle grazed in the growing shadows. He helped her down from the horse, then led her toward the house. On the porch, he stopped and turned to face her. His hands worked at something in his pocket. When he pulled them out, he held a small key. "Turn around," he said. Ellie hesitated. Every instinct screamed against showing her back to this stranger who had purchased her like property. But something in his voice, some quality she couldn't name, made her comply. The shackles that bound her ankles fell away with a soft clink. Arthur stepped back, the key and chains in his hands. "You're free," he said. "I'll give you a horse and supplies to get wherever you need to go." Ellie turned to face him, confusion replacing the fear she'd carried since her capture. "Why? What's the catch?" "No catch." Arthur's eyes held her steady. What they did was wrong. The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any grand speech might have. She studied his face again, looking for deception, for hidden motives. She found only a quiet sincerity that seemed as foreign in this harsh land as rain in the desert. "I was traveling to start a school," she said. "My contact in town has disappeared." Arthur nodded as if this news didn't surprise him. "These are dangerous times for folks trying to do good. I have nowhere else to go." The admission cost her something. All her life, Ellie had prided herself on independence, on never needing to rely on others for survival. But the truth stood between them like a canyon too wide to cross alone. Arthur looked out at the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. "You can stay here tonight, maybe longer if you need to. Why would you help me? Maybe because it's the right thing to do." Arthur's voice carried the weight of unspoken history. "Maybe because this land needs more good in it." Ellie felt something shift inside her chest. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. She had learned to be cautious with hope, to guard it like a candle flame in a windstorm. But this quiet rancher with his simple words and steady eyes made her want to believe that decency still existed in the world. "I don't trust easily," she said. Arthur nodded, understanding. "Don't expect you should." As the desert night settled around them, Ellie made her decision. She would stay, at least for tonight. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own choices. But for the first time since her capture, she felt something other than fear. She felt the faint stirring of possibility. Dawn broke over the ranch like a promise barely whispered. Ellie woke to the sound of Arthur chopping wood behind the house, each strike of the axe steady and sure. She had slept in the guest room, the first real bed she'd known in weeks. The quilt smelled of lavender and honest work. She found him splitting logs for the stove, his shirt already damp with sweat despite the cool morning air. He looked up when she approached, nodding once in greeting. The wood pile grew higher with each swing. "I want to build a school," she said. Arthur's axe paused mid-swing. He set it down, wiping his hands on his pants. The morning light caught the dust motes dancing between them. "Here, anywhere. Children need to learn. All children." Arthur studied her face, seeing something there that made him straighten. The conviction in her voice cut through the desert air sharper than any blade. "This land could use more learning," he said. "You'd help me? Maybe because it's the right thing to do." Arthur picked up another log, positioned it carefully. "Maybe because this land needs more good in it." The school began as an idea sketched in the dirt with a stick. Ellie drew the outline while Arthur listened, his calloused hands tracing the boundaries she described. 4 walls, windows facing east to catch the morning light, a bell tower that would ring across the valley. Within a week, the frame stood against the horizon. Arthur worked with the focused intensity of a man building something sacred. His hands shaped each board with care, measuring twice, cutting once. Ellie watched him work, noting how he handled the tools like old friends. She prepared lessons while he built, writing on scraps of paper in the evenings by lamplight. Mathematics, reading, history that told the truth instead of comfortable lies. Arthur would glance up from his own work, mending harnesses or checking accounts, and find her bent over her writing. "You're not what I expected," she said one evening. Arthur looked up from the bridle he was repairing. "What did you expect?" "Someone who would own another human being." Arthur's hands stilled on the leather. "I never wanted to own you. I wanted to free you." The words hung between them like smoke from the oil lamp. Ellie felt something shift in her chest, a wall cracking just enough to let in light. The first students arrived on a Tuesday morning when the school bell rang for the first time. 3 Mexican children whose parents worked the neighboring ranch. A Navajo boy whose grandfather had fought both Mexicans and Americans for the same red earth. 2 white children whose mother defied her husband's orders to keep them home. Ellie stood before them in her best dress, the one she'd worn to teach in Kansas before the world turned upside down. The children watched her with wide eyes, uncertain but curious. "Education is the path to freedom," she told them. "Not just from ignorance, but from fear." Arthur watched from the doorway, his shoulder against the frame. The joy on Ellie's face as she taught made something warm spread through his chest. He'd forgotten that such pure happiness existed in the world. The trouble started small. Whispers in town about the school that taught all colors together. Cold stares when Ellie walked to the general store. Parents who forbade their children from attending. Threats muttered just loud enough to be heard. Micah Bell led the opposition with the fervor of a man whose hatred had found purpose. He gathered followers outside the saloon, men whose prejudice ran deeper than the desert roots. They spoke of contamination, of the natural order being disturbed. Arthur confronted him one afternoon in the street. The 2 men faced each other while dust devils danced between the buildings. Micah's hand rested on his gun belt, but Arthur's remained at his sides. "This is a white man's territory," Micah said. "We don't need your kind of schooling here." "The children are learning," Arthur replied. "That's all that matters." "You'll regret this, Morgan. Both of you will." Arthur watched Micah walk away, noting how the man's shoulders carried the weight of his own failures. Some men chose to lift others up. Others chose to drag them down. The difference revealed everything about their character. That evening, Arthur found Ellie sitting on the porch steps, staring at the horizon where the sun painted the sky in shades of fire. She held a letter in her hands, the paper worn soft from repeated reading. "From Kansas," she said without looking up. "From my sister. She says I should come home." Arthur settled beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, but careful not to intrude. "What do you want to do?" "I want to stay. I want to teach. I want to make a difference." "Then stay." "It's not that simple. There are people who want me gone. People who would hurt you for helping me." Arthur turned to face her, studying her profile in the fading light. Sometimes starting fresh means leaving things behind you'd rather forget. Something in his voice made her look at him directly. She saw pain there, old wounds that had never fully healed. But she also saw determination, the kind that came from making peace with the past. "What did you leave behind?" she asked. Arthur's eyes returned to the horizon. "Things that don't matter anymore." The silence stretched between them, comfortable now instead of tense. Ellie folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. Kansas felt like another lifetime, another woman's dream. "I'll stay," she said. "Good." One word, but it carried the weight of a promise. Arthur would stand with her against whatever came. The certainty of it settled into her bones like warmth from a fire. The next morning brought Dutch van der Linde to the ranch. He rode up with 2 other men, their badges glinting in the morning sun. Arthur met them in the yard, his hands resting easy at his sides. "Sheriff," Arthur said. "Arthur." Dutch's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Heard you're running a school now. Interesting development. Children need education. Some folks are saying you're getting too attached to your property. That could be dangerous for a man with your past." The threat hung in the air like heat. Shimmer. Arthur felt Ellie watching from the schoolhouse window, her students gathered behind her. He kept his voice level, unthreatening. "No law against teaching children to read." "No," Dutch agreed. "But there are other laws. Older laws. You remember those, don't you?" Arthur remembered. The weight of his past pressed against his chest. Like a stone. Dutch waited, knowing the effect his words would have. "Times change," Arthur said finally. "Some things never change." Dutch tipped his hat. "Think about what I said." They rode away in a cloud of dust, leaving Arthur standing alone in the yard. He felt the weight of eyes upon him, of choices that would define not just his future, but the future of everyone he'd sworn to protect. Inside the schoolhouse, Ellie continued her lesson. Her voice carried across the yard, steady and sure, teaching children to read words that might someday set them free. Arthur listened to that voice and knew he'd made his choice long ago. The school would stand. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The papers scattered across the floor like autumn leaves, each one a fragment of a life Ellie thought. She understood. Her hands trembled as she picked up the wanted poster, Arthur's face staring back at her from yellowed parchment. The reward amount might as well have been written in blood. She had been cleaning Arthur's study, a simple gesture of gratitude that had turned into betrayal. The saddlebags had fallen open when she moved them, spilling their secrets across the wooden planks. $500 for Arthur Morgan. Armed robbery. Murder. The words blurred together through her tears. The front door opened with its familiar creak. Arthur's boots echoed through the house, steady and sure. The sound she had come to associate with safety now made her stomach clench with fear. "Ellie," his voice carried from the kitchen. She couldn't answer. The poster crinkled in her grip as she tried to make sense of the man she thought she knew. The gentle hands that had built her school. The quiet voice that had spoken of redemption. All of it built on lies. Arthur appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. His eyes found the scattered papers, the poster she clutched against her chest. Something died in his expression, a hope extinguished before it could fully bloom. "I never lied about who I am now," he said. The words cut through her like wind through broken glass. She stood, the poster falling to the floor between them. Her legs felt unsteady, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath her feet. "You're an outlaw, a killer." Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "This whole time you've been lying to me." Arthur's hands worked at the brim of his hat, fingers finding familiar creases. "Yes, I was those things, but I left that life behind. How can I trust anything you say? How do I know you won't revert?" The question hung between them like a chasm too wide to cross. Arthur set his hat on the desk, his movements careful and deliberate. When he looked at her again, his eyes carried the weight of every mistake he'd ever made. "I rode with Dutch for years," he said. "We told ourselves we were fighting injustice, but we became the very evil we claimed to fight." Ellie backed against the bookshelf, her hand finding the spine of a primer she'd been using to teach the children. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been teaching them to read while living with a man whose past was written in other people's blood. "And Dutch just let you go?" "Dutch believes in loyalty above all else. He's been waiting for me to come back." The pieces fell into place. Like dominoes, Dutch's visits. The warnings. The way Arthur's jaw tightened whenever the sheriff's name was mentioned. She had been living in the shadow of a war she didn't understand. "The auction," she whispered. Arthur nodded, his shoulders sagging under the weight of confession. "I knew what that auction was because I used to help run them. That's why I had to save you. To balance the scales for all the people I failed to save." The room seemed to shrink around them. Ellie felt the walls pressing in, the air growing thin. She had trusted this man with her life, her dreams, her heart. And all the while, he'd been carrying the ghosts of his victims. "How many people?" she asked. Arthur's silence was answer enough. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows in their frames. Dust swirled across the yard, obscuring the schoolhouse where children had learned to believe in better things. The storm building on the horizon matched the one tearing through her chest. "I saw what I was becoming," Arthur said. "The look in people's eyes when they saw me coming. The fear, the resignation. I couldn't be that person anymore. But you were. For years you were." Yes, one word, but it carried the weight of 100 confessions. Arthur stood in the doorway, making no move to approach her. He understood that trust, once broken, couldn't be commanded back into existence. Ellie sank into the chair behind the desk, her hands pressed flat against the wood. The grain beneath her palms told its own story of growth and cutting, of trees that had fallen to make something new. She wondered if people could be rebuilt the same way. "Promise me something," she said without looking up. Arthur waited. "Promise me you'll never be that man again." "I'd rather die than become that man again." The conviction in his voice made her lift her head. She studied his face, searching for deception, for the hollowness that lived behind empty promises. Instead, she found something that looked like truth carved from suffering. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I've had every chance to revert, every provocation, every excuse. And I chose different every time." The words settled between them like seeds in drought-hardened earth. Ellie felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. She had learned to read people's faces in her years of teaching, to see past the masks they wore to the truth beneath. Arthur's truth was complicated, stained, but it was real. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide if you can live with who I was, or if you can only live with who I am." The distinction mattered. Ellie understood that her choice would define not just their future, but the kind of person she wanted to be. Did she believe in redemption, in second chances, in the possibility that people could change? Outside, the storm clouds gathered over the desert, pregnant with the promise of rain. The schoolhouse stood empty, waiting for tomorrow's lessons. The children would return, trusting her to teach them about the world and their place in it. What would she teach them about forgiveness? Arthur picked up the scattered papers, his movements careful and respectful. He stacked them neatly on the desk, including the wanted poster that had started this reckoning. When he finished, he looked at her one last time. "I'll understand if you want to leave," he said. Ellie stood, her decision crystallizing with the clarity of lightning against dark sky. She walked to the window, looking out at the land they had been trying to heal together. The school, the children, the small acts of defiance that had become acts of love. "I'm not leaving," she said. Arthur's reflection appeared beside hers. "In the glass, the danger is real. Dutch won't give up easily. I know. There will be more storms, more tests. I know." They stood together in the growing darkness, two people who had found each other across the wreckage of their separate pasts. The wind outside carried the scent of rain and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices to make. But tonight, they had chosen each other. Broken and healing, honest at last about the shadows they carried. The truth had nearly destroyed them. Instead, it had set them free. The evening air carried the scent of sage and possibility as Arthur and Ellie sat on the porch steps, watching the desert paint itself in shades of gold and crimson. 3 weeks had passed since the truth about Arthur's past had nearly torn them apart. 3 weeks of careful rebuilding, of trust earned one quiet moment at a time. Ellie leaned against the porch rail, her fingers tracing patterns in the dust that had settled on the wood. Arthur sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The space between them hummed with unspoken words. "Sometimes I think about what our life could be," she said, "without all this hatred around us." Arthur's hands stilled on the bridle he was mending. "Maybe someday we can build that life. Together." The word hung between them like a prayer. Together. It carried weight now, promise and peril intertwined. They had chosen each other with full knowledge of the cost. The school bell stood silent in the gathering dusk. Only 5 students had attended. That week, down from the dozen who had filled the classroom just a month before. Fear moved through the community like wildfire, consuming courage wherever it found it. Parents whispered warnings to their children. Storekeepers looked away when Ellie entered their shops. The postmaster handed her letters with trembling fingers, as if her touch might contaminate him. The town was choosing sides, and most chose the familiar comfort of hatred over the uncertain promise of change. Arthur found the first cow on Tuesday morning, bloated and stiff in the north pasture. Poison, though he couldn't prove it. The second cow followed 2 days later. A message written in dead animals, clear as any words. He buried them both without complaint, his shovel biting into earth that had grown as hard as the hearts of his neighbors. Ellie watched from the schoolhouse window, her students gathered around her. She taught them about perseverance that day, using Arthur's steady labor as her text. "Why does someone want to hurt Mr. Morgan?" asked Maria, the youngest of the Mexican. "Children," Ellie chose her words carefully, "because he stands up for what's right. And that frightens people who profit from what's wrong." The cross appeared on Saturday night, burned into the ground between the house and the schoolhouse. Arthur found it at dawn, the charred earth still warm beneath his boots. He kicked dirt over the ashes, but the scar remained, a wound in the red earth that would take time to heal. Ellie emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She stopped when she saw the blackened ground, her face drawing tight with controlled fury. "They're trying to break us," she said. "Let them try." Arthur's voice carried the quiet strength of stone worn smooth by wind and rain. He accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The simple contact sent warmth through both of them, a reminder that they were not alone in this fight. Micah Bell's campaign of hatred grew bolder by the day. He stood on street corners, preaching his gospel of racial purity to anyone who would listen. His words found fertile ground in hearts already poisoned by fear and ignorance. Any parent who sends their child to that school is a traitor to their own kind, he declared outside the church after Sunday service. "We must protect our children from contamination." The crowd murmured agreement. Even some who had initially supported the school now nodded along, swept up in the fever of collective hatred. Fear was contagious, spreading faster than any disease. Dutch's visits became more frequent, more pointed. He arrived with different men each time, their badges gleaming in the afternoon sun. They spoke of disturbing the peace, of inciting unrest. Their words carried the weight of barely contained violence. "You're a stubborn man, Arthur," Dutch said during his latest visit. "Always were. But stubbornness can be a liability when it endangers the community." Arthur stood in his doorway, blocking Dutch's view of the interior. Ellie was inside, grading papers by lamplight. The normalcy of it felt precious and fragile. "Teaching children to read isn't a crime," Arthur replied. "No, but harboring fugitives is, disturbing the peace is. Inciting racial tension is." Dutch's smile was sharp as a blade. "A man with your past should be more careful about drawing attention." The threat settled over the ranch like smoke from a distant fire. Arthur felt the weight of his choices, the responsibility he carried. For Ellie's safety. Love had made him vulnerable in ways he'd never experienced as an outlaw. That night, they sat together in the kitchen, the lamp casting long shadows across the wooden table. Ellie corrected arithmetic problems, while Arthur cleaned his rifle. The domestic scene felt surreal given the dangers gathering around them. "Maybe I should leave," Ellie said without looking up from her papers. Arthur's hands stilled on the gun oil. "Running from bullies never solved anything. I'm not talking about running. I'm talking about protecting you. We stand together." 2 words, but they carried the weight of a vow. Arthur set down his rifle and reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Her fingers intertwined with his calloused palm against soft skin. "They want us to be afraid," he said. "Fear makes people do terrible things, but love makes them do extraordinary things." The wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of approaching storm. In the distance, lightning flickered against the horizon, illuminating the clouds that were building for the confrontation both of them knew was coming. Dutch arrived the next morning with a larger group, his patience finally exhausted. He sat his horse in the yard while his men spread out in a loose circle around the house. The message was clear without words needing to be spoken. Arthur emerged from the house, his hand resting easy on his gun belt. Ellie appeared beside him, her chin raised in defiance. They stood together on the porch, two people who had chosen love over fear. "You've had your fun, Arthur," Dutch called out. "Time to shut down this school and get rid of the girl. Business is business." Arthur's voice carried across the yard, steady and sure. "She's not going anywhere, and neither am I." Dutch's smile faded, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Then you've chosen your side. I'm disappointed, son." The word son carried the weight of shared history, of bonds forged in violence and broken by conscience. Arthur felt the pull of his past, the easy camaraderie of men who solved problems with bullets. But Ellie's presence beside him anchored him to the present, to the man he had chosen to become. "I chose my side long ago," Arthur replied. Dutch wheeled his horse around, dust swirling in his wake. His men followed, but their eyes lingered on the house, measuring distances, noting vulnerabilities. The next visit would not be for conversation. As the riders disappeared into the desert heat, Arthur felt Ellie's hand slip into his. Her grip was steady, her resolve unshaken. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. The storm was coming, but they would face it together, love against hatred, hope against fear. The outcome remained uncertain, but their commitment to each other was absolute. The school bell waited in the growing heat, ready to ring again when the children returned. If they returned, the future hung in the balance, fragile as morning dew in the desert sun. The schoolhouse door hung broken on its hinges, splintered wood scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Ellie's carefully prepared lessons lay, torn and trampled, years of work reduced to debris in minutes. The children huddled in the corner, their eyes wide with terror that would linger long after the physical wounds healed. Micah Bell stood in the center of the destruction, his boots grinding primer pages into the dust. His men flanked him, their faces masks of satisfied cruelty. The raid had been swift and thorough, designed to crush hope before it could take deeper root. "Pack your things, teacher," Micah said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had never been denied. "You're coming with us." Ellie placed herself between the children and their tormentors, her body a shield against hatred made manifest. "Let them go first. They've learned their lesson. Won't be coming back to this place." The children fled through the broken door, their small feet carrying them toward homes that might no longer welcome them. Ellie watched them disappear into the desert heat, her heart breaking for dreams cut short by fear. Strong hands seized her arms, dragging her from the wreckage of her classroom. She did not struggle. Dignity mattered more than resistance in moments when both were under assault. The rope that bound her wrists felt familiar now, another link in a chain that stretched back to auction blocks and broken promises. Arthur found the destruction 20 minutes later, his horse lathered with sweat from the hard ride back from town. The silence struck him first, that terrible absence of children's voices that had become the soundtrack of hope. Then he saw the schoolhouse, its windows dark and empty as dead eyes. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground at a run. The interior devastated him more than he had expected. Books torn in half, desks overturned. The alphabet chart Ellie had painted by hand shredded beyond recognition. But no blood, no bodies. That gave him hope enough to fuel what came next. Seti Adler emerged from the general store as Arthur thundered back into town, his face carved from stone and purpose. She had been waiting for this moment, knowing it would come eventually. The confrontation between past and present could not be avoided forever. "They took her to the old mine," Sadie said without preamble. "Dutch has been using it for his operations." Arthur's hands stilled on his reins. "How do you know?" "Because I've been helping people escape from there for months." Your Ellie wasn't his first victim, and she won't be his last unless we stop him. The revelation hit Arthur like a physical blow. Sadi's unusual knowledge of people's whereabouts, her insistence on helping, her husband's suspicious death the previous year. All of it made sense now. Why didn't you tell me? Because you weren't ready to hear it. You were still running from your past instead of using it. John Marston arrived as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, his face grim with understanding. Arthur had sent word through channels that still functioned from their outlaw days, networks of loyalty that transcended the law. How many men? John asked. 6, maybe 7, plus Dutch. And how many innocent people? Too many. They planned in the back room of Sadie's store, spreading maps across surfaces that had seen too many desperate conversations. The mine sat in a box canyon, easily defensible but also easily trapped. Dutch had chosen it for the same reasons that would now work against him. We go in quiet, Arthur said. No unnecessary shooting. We're not killers anymore. Speak for yourself, Sadie replied, checking her rifle. Some people deserve killing. Maybe, but we don't deserve to become killers again. The distinction mattered to Arthur in ways he couldn't fully explain. Redemption was a fragile thing, easily lost. In moments of justified anger, he had chosen to be better than his past, even when his past might serve the present. The ride to the mine took them through country that remembered violence, where Apache and cavalry had written their arguments in blood and bone. The desert kept its secrets, but Arthur could read the signs of old battles in the wind-carved rocks and sun-bleached wood. They left their horses a mile from the canyon mouth, proceeding on foot through terrain that offered little cover. The mine buildings crouched against the canyon wall like tumors, their windows glowing with lamplight as darkness fell. Arthur counted the guards, noting their positions and patrol patterns. Dutch had grown careless with success, trusting in isolation and fear to protect his operations. It was a mistake that would cost him everything. The first guard fell to John's quiet approach, unconscious before he could cry out. The second never saw Sadie coming, her movements fluid as water over stone. Arthur felt the familiar rhythm of coordinated action, the dance of violence he had spent years trying to forget. But this was different. This was rescue, not robbery. Justice, not greed. The distinction mattered, even if the methods remained the same. The mine entrance yawned before them, a mouth opened in the earth to swallow light and hope. Arthur paused at the threshold, memories of similar descents flooding back. How many times had he entered dark places in service of Dutch's ambitions? How many times had he emerged with blood on his hands? This time would be different. This time, he was walking into darkness to bring someone into light. The tunnel stretched ahead, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Voices echoed from deeper in the mine, Dutch's unmistakable cadence weaving through the complaints of prisoners and the laughter of guards. Arthur moved forward, his footsteps silent on the packed earth. Behind him, John and Sadie followed, their presence a comfort and a weight. They were trusting him to lead them true, to be the man he claimed to have become. The main chamber opened. Before them, carved from living rock and fitted with iron bars, a dozen prisoners sat in cages, their eyes reflecting the lamplight with the dull shine of broken hope. Arthur scanned their faces, searching for the one that mattered most. He found Allie in the farthest cage, her dress torn but her posture unbroken. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, dignity intact despite everything they had done to her. When she saw him, her eyes widened with something that might have been relief. Dutch stood in the center of the chamber, his arms spread wide in a gesture of ownership. "Welcome home, Arthur. I knew you'd come eventually. Let them go. All of them? That's expensive mercy. Name your price." Dutch's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You, back in the fold, back where you belong." The offer hung between them, like smoke from the oil lamps. Arthur felt the weight of eyes upon him, prisoners and guards alike waiting to see which man he would choose to be. "I belong with her," Arthur said, nodding toward Ellie. "Then you've chosen poorly." Dutch's hand moved toward his gun, but Arthur was already in motion. Not to draw his weapon, but to reach for the support beam that held up this section of the mine. His years of hard labor had taught him to read the stress points in wood and stone, to know where pressure applied would bring the greatest result. The beam cracked under his weight, and the ceiling began to groan. Dust rained down from above as the mountain reminded everyone of its ultimate authority. Dutch's men looked up in alarm, their attention diverted from their prisoners. "Everyone out!" Arthur shouted. "Now!" The prisoners needed no second invitation. They rushed from their opened cages, streaming toward the tunnel entrance as the mine began its slow collapse. Arthur fought through the chaos to reach Ellie, his hands making quick work of her bonds. "There are others," she said. "We can't leave them." "We're not leaving anyone." Together, they shepherded the last of the prisoners toward safety, their love tested not by passion but by shared commitment to protecting the vulnerable. The mine groaned around them, eager to reclaim the space that had been carved from its heart. Dutch stood alone in the collapsing chamber, his empire crumbling around him. His eyes met Arthur's across the chaos, and for a moment, something passed between them that might have been understanding. Then Arthur turned away, following Ellie toward the light. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days after the mine collapse, his badge catching the morning light as he surveyed the wreckage of Dutch's operation. 12 prisoners freed. Evidence of trafficking operations spanning 3 territories. A criminal network that had operated in shadows for years, finally dragged into the unforgiving desert sun. Arthur stood beside the marshal, his hands resting easy at his sides. The lawman studied his face, noting the weathered features and steady eyes of a man who had seen both sides of justice. "You've done a great service, Mr. Morgan," the marshal said. "These crimes would have continued without your intervention." Arthur nodded once, accepting the words without pride or false modesty. Justice was its own reward, requiring no additional recognition. The freed prisoners were testimony enough to the rightness of his actions. Dutch emerged from the mine ruins. In shackles, his once immaculate appearance now dust-covered and broken. The collapse had trapped him and his remaining men until rescue arrived, though rescue had come in the form of territorial law rather than criminal confederates. Their eyes met across the canyon, former partners now standing on opposite sides of a divide that could never be bridged. Dutch's smile held no warmth, only the bitter recognition of a game played and lost. "This isn't over, Arthur," Dutch said. As the marshal led him toward the waiting wagon, "Yes, it is. For both of us." The words carried finality, a door closing on a chapter of Arthur's life that had lasted too long. He watched the wagon disappear into the desert heat, carrying his past away from his future. Ellie waited by the schoolhouse ruins, her hands sorting through salvageable books and papers. The destruction looked worse in daylight, but she moved through it with the determined grace of someone who had learned to find hope in devastation. Arthur approached quietly, his boots crunching on broken glass and splintered wood. She looked up at his approach, her face reflecting the same quiet strength that had sustained her through the auction block and everything that followed. "We'll rebuild," she said. "Bigger this time, better." The promise hung between them, solid as the mountains that ringed their valley. They had lost a building, but the idea it represented had proved stronger than hatred or fear. Ideas once planted grew roots too deep for shallow men to destroy. News of the rescue spread through Redemption Creek faster than wildfire. The truth about Dutch's operations shocked even those who had supported him, revealing the depths of corruption that had poisoned their community. Shame replaced anger in many hearts, though shame was a beginning rather than an end. Samuel Hayes approached Arthur outside the ruins, his hat in his hands and his eyes cast down. The same man who had forbidden his children from attending the school now struggled to find words adequate to his regret. "I was wrong about you, Morgan, about Miss Freeman. My children need what she was teaching." Arthur accepted the apology with a nod, understanding that redemption was a gift that multiplied when shared. Everyone deserved the chance to choose better, to grow beyond the boundaries of their own prejudice. More families followed. The Mexican rancher whose children had been among the first students, the widow who had kept her daughter home out of fear, the shopkeeper who had looked away when Ellie entered his store. One by one, they came to offer help rebuilding what fear had torn down. The new schoolhouse rose from the ashes of the old, its walls stronger and its windows wider. The whole community worked together, their hands joined in the labor of creation rather than destruction. Arthur swung his hammer alongside men who had once viewed him with suspicion, their shared purpose erasing old divisions. Ellie stood before the completed building, her hand resting on the doorframe that Arthur had carved with particular care. The wood was smooth under her fingers, shaped by hands that had learned to create rather than destroy. "Will you marry me?" Arthur asked. The question came without ceremony, spoken in the quiet moment before the school's dedication. Ellie turned to face him, seeing in his weathered features the man who had chosen love over fear, redemption over revenge. "Are you sure you want this life? The challenges won't end." "I'm sure. We'll face them together." The wedding took place in the schoolyard, officiated by the traveling preacher who served the scattered communities of the territory. The guests were the families whose children would attend the school, their presence a testament to the bonds that had been forged in struggle and strengthened by shared hope. Ellie wore her best dress, the same one she had worn to teach in Kansas before the world had turned upside down. Arthur wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed with care. They spoke their vows under the desert sky, promising to love and protect each other through whatever storms might come. The children threw flower petals as they walked back toward the schoolhouse, their laughter carrying across the valley. The sound filled Arthur's chest with warmth, a reminder of what they had built together and what they would continue to build. The school bell rang for the first time in the new building, its bronze voice calling children to learning and growth. 37 students answered that call, more than had ever attended the original school. They came from every family in the valley, united in their hunger for knowledge and their parents' recognition that education was the path to a better future. Ellie stood before her enlarged class, her voice carrying clearly through the room as she began the day's lessons. Arthur watched from the doorway, his shoulder against the frame, his heart full of quiet pride. "Education is the path to freedom," she told her students, "not just from ignorance, but from the fear that ignorance breeds." The children bent over their slates, practicing letters that would one day form words, words that would one day form ideas, ideas that would one day form a world better than the one they had inherited. The cycle of learning and growth would continue, each generation building upon the foundation laid by those who had come before. That evening, Arthur and Ellie sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The valley stretched before them, dotted with the lights of homes where families lived and worked and dreamed of better days. "You know what you did that day at the auction?" Ellie asked. Arthur turned to look at her, this woman who had become his partner in every sense of the word. "What's that?" "You didn't just buy my freedom, you bought your own." The words settled between them like a benediction, a recognition of the journey they had traveled together. From the auction block to the schoolhouse, from hatred to love, from despair to hope. They had found each other across the wreckage of their separate pasts and built something beautiful from the fragments. The school bell stood silent in the growing darkness, ready to ring again when morning came. The children would return, eager to learn and grow and become the leaders their community needed. The cycle would continue, each day bringing new opportunities to choose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, Hope over despair. Arthur reached for Ellie's hand, their fingers intertwining as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to make their corner of the world a little better than they had found it. The desert wind carried the scent of rain and possibility, of dreams taking root in soil that had been watered by sacrifice and tended by love. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise, shaped by the choices they made each day to stand together against the darkness. In the distance, the schoolhouse waited, its windows dark, but its purpose undimmed. Inside, books and slates and maps waited to open young minds to the wider world. The alphabet chart that Ellie had painted hung on the wall, each letter a building block for the dreams that would be born in that room. The story of Arthur and Ellie had begun with an auction and a choice, with one man's decision to stand up for what was right despite the cost. It continued with a school and a community, with the daily work of building something better from the ruins of what had been. And it would continue tomorrow and the day after and for all the days to come. Because love, once planted, grows deeper roots than hatred. And hope, once kindled, burns brighter than fear. And the courage to stand up for what is right, once awakened, spreads from heart to heart until it transforms the world. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.